Moreover, she was pretty and intelligent, and might possibly be able to influence Shara. She promised to try. That evening I could not sleep. I could think only of Vera, her courage and strength. Now at last I understood her Mona Lisa smile. Her pregnancy had made it easier for her to endure imprisonment. I wondered if we would have a small child to take care of in the camp. After several days of waiting, Gizi had news. Shara has promised that Vera will be allowed to have her baby. We could not believe it. It's true. You can give birth in the sick bay. Vera lifted her head. Her eyes widened and she gave a broad smile. Blessed be God. Now she became more communicative. In the evening we sat on our beds and listened to her for hour upon hour. She told us of her beloved Zdenek, of her grief when they were parted, her suspicion of pregnancy which became certainty, of the baby which had grown inside her, her plans, her hopes, how she intended to care for it. As she sat and talked, she glowed, her blonde hair luminous in the weak lamplight. We tended and protected her, doing her work when we could, and sharing our meager rations with her. She needed them more than we did. But it was still not enough. We knew she needed more nourishment. And how would we clothe the baby when it was born? I wrote to Paul, a French prisoner of war I secretly met one day, and asked him for help. Next day I received a packet of powdered milk and a needle, and when I was clearing up after the bombing, I found a reel containing several yards of cotton. Now I had only to find a piece of cloth, and I could make a little shirt. But where would I get that? We had no sheets, and our clothes were carefully inspected. We could not get fresh ones before we had handed back every item. We racked our brains. Each girl would approach her French prisoner of war. We would search in the ruins. Perhaps Gizi could provide some rags. But none of this led to anything. I had almost given up hope when Paul received a parcel from the Red Cross. By a miracle it contained 2 handkerchiefs, which he at once sent on to me. That evening we all helped to turn the 2 grey squares into a tiny shirt, the most wonderful little shirt I have ever seen. Now the baby could be born. Everything was ready. And it came. A few mornings later, we awoke to find Vera's bed empty. I ran to the sick bay, but she was not there. Gizi was sitting there alone, staring emptily. Her face was ashen, her body hunched, her chin drooped on her breast. For God's sake, what has happened? She did not reply. She did not seem even to see me, but just went on staring. When I shook her and repeated my question, the emptiness left her eyes, and she looked at me in terror, as though she had just seen something even worse. Eventually she spoke. Dead. Vera, dead? No, Vera is alive. The child is dead. I hugged and stroked her. Try to tell me, Gizi. My touch seemed to release something in her, and she began to cry. Her first words were unintelligible, but gradually I understood that when Vera's labor had begun, Gizi was ordered to take her to the empty barracks. Shara came and witnessed the birth. Then he forced Gizi to drown it. Now she sat there, incredulous that she had been able to perform so inhuman an act. I knew I had to calm her, make her understand that it was Shara, not she, who had murdered the child. I could not stay long with her, for the signal for roll call had already sounded. The girls were lined up, and I did not want them to be punished for my absence, so I left her and went into the yard. The first person I saw was Vera. She stood in her line, thin, shaky and pale, her eyes dead. Everyone was looking at her. None dared speak. Not until we went to work could she tell me anything. "I didn't even see him," she whispered. Poor Vera, poor Gizzy. Which was the more to be pitied? Vera could not work. Even the work leader could see that. So she was told to lay a fire in the guard room. She wept unceasingly, and we had no words of comfort to offer. She could not understand that she had been duped. She thought she had been promised that she could keep the child. Time and time again she took out the little shirt and cradled it. When at last she could find words, she said, "I don't wish that none of this had happened. Being pregnant was the best thing that has happened in my life." The days passed as if on a conveyor belt. It was good when nothing happened, but the SS men liked to shake us up. We were not allowed to enjoy peace for long. As soon as we became accustomed to a workplace, we had to move and begin again from the beginning, make new contacts among the prisoners of war, for their little packages meant all the difference between life and death. Another way to shake us up was by repeated bed checks. If a blanket was not correctly tucked in, we were punished, as of course we were if anything was found beneath the mattress. We tried to keep any little scrap we found. Everything was of value to us, who owned nothing. Many kept their morning's ration so as to have a little to eke out the midday and evening soup, only to regret their husbandry when they found it had disappeared. Some weeks, or it may have been months, after Vera's tragedy, we were met on our return to camp by Shara in a rage. Our beds had been badly made, and bread and other things had been found in almost every one. We would be sternly punished. We would learn once and for all that he was not to be trifled with. The offenders were called out, among them Vera. Shara knew how to prolong a punishment, and after repeating that the penalty would be severe, he stalked off, leaving them standing to attention. A good while later he returned and announced, "Punishment work on Sunday." The yard was to be flattened, the uneven areas filled with earth, and the earth leveled with a roller. This would be a lesson to us that rules existed to be obeyed. The next Sunday, after roll call, the offenders were assembled in the yard, and after another sermon were allotted their tasks. Some had to dig, others to spread the earth, and the hardest task, that of pulling the heavy roller, was given to Vera. Shara gave the signal to begin and posted himself to enjoy the spectacle. Vera went to the roller and began to pull. It was clear that force was needed to move it. She bowed almost to the ground, making a little bob backwards for every step she took. We wondered how long she could go on, but on she went, dragging the heavy roller forward and back, with an expressionless face. Occasionally she stopped, took several deep breaths, and dried the sweat from her forehead. Shara smiled contentedly. At noon they were allowed half an hour's rest to come inside and eat. Vera was completely exhausted, and we did not think she could go on. She herself hardly believed it. But she was driven out again. Shara knew no pity. Everyone had to go on. The rest of us could not help. We could only watch from the window and try to will them strength. As twilight fell, I saw a team of ghosts toiling there. When the signal to stop work was at last blown, Vera collapsed in front of her roller. I ran out to help her. She had fainted. I got water and bathed her temples. When she came to, she said, "I would rather die than endure another Sunday like this." It was the first time I had heard her speak like that. Vera, who always thought of the future, who was always optimistic, who always looked forward to a life of freedom, however unattainable that might seem. Her prayer was heard. By the following Sunday she was dead. Bergen-Belsen. We are lying apathetically on our beds. Someone asks, "How long have you been here?" Who knows? A week, a month, a year. What date is it? Someone said, the 15th of April. We lacked the strength to make any unnecessary movement, utter any needless word. I just lay there. I don't think I even had a thought in my head. As the day went on, there was a sudden noise outside. The girl nearest the window shouted hysterically, "British tanks!" Poor child, she has become delirious, I thought. I did not bother to look. Some hours passed. Then fresh noises were heard from the yard. Someone in one of the upper bunks sat up, looked through the window and cried, "Look! Look! The soldiers are running!" "They have white armbands," said another. "Look! A British soldier!" With difficulty I got to my feet and tottered to the window. I was not sure, but I thought I saw uniformed soldiers who were not Germans. We had been liberated. At that moment I felt only an indescribable weariness. I walked back to the bed and wanted only to sleep. But suddenly my mind began to work. I began to plan tomorrow. There was silence in the barracks. The whispers of joy had ceased. Most of the girls were already asleep, exhausted. Tomorrow, tomorrow, tomorrow we shall begin to live. Freedom. I could not fully grasp what this might mean. But one thing I knew. I am alive, having been dead. I died the night we came to Auschwitz. But now I am alive again. I have been granted a second ration of life. Who knows what kind of life awaits me? Whatever happens will happen to another me, who has nothing left of the girl who was born in Sighet one June day in 1924. Stockholm, Sweden, August 1985. 40 years, a lifetime, an extra ration, another spoonful of life which I was granted on the 15th of April 1945. I pondered for a long time what might be the meaning of this extra ration, this new life. It took me 40 years to realize that I am a witness and that it is my task to tell what I experienced, although I am not a writer. We who survived are so few. We must tell of this inhuman thing that was done in the 20th century. It must not be forgotten, and it must never happen again. I still remember, but hardly know how it felt. I remember the infected toenail. I remember the shame when I stood naked. I remember the moment of goodbye. I still remember most of it, but the memories fade. If they fade in me, how will it be with those who never experienced it? And later generations, will they be able to understand?
Hedi Fried's book, Fragments of a Life, The Road to Auschwitz, is published by Robert Hale and was translated by Michael Mayer.